The wind on Thorn Crest doesn't just howl, it tells stories of forgotten men and frozen secrets. For Caleb Thorn, it was a sound he'd spent his life trying to escape. He'd come back only to sell the land to sever the final tie to a father he respected but never loved. But on a day when the sky threatened to swallow the mountains whole, he found a man dangling from the widow's watch, a stranger turning purple in the gale. He cut him down, dragged him from the jaws of death, and brought him into the one place he never wanted to be. And as the blizzard sealed them in, the stranger woke, and with a voice like shattering ice, he spoke the one name that could unravel Caleb's entire world: Chief Two Crows. The cold was a physical entity in the high country of Montana. It was a predator that stalked the draws and ridges of the Absaroka Range, and on this late November afternoon, it was closing in for the kill. Caleb Thorn felt it in the marrow of his bones, a familiar, unwelcome ache that was as much a part of his inheritance as the sprawling, snow-dusted ranch around him. Thorn Crest, a name that carried weight in the valley, a legacy forged by his father's iron will and calloused hands. Caleb Sr. had been a force of nature, a man who seemed carved from the same granite as the peaks that shadowed his land. But to his son, this legacy was a gilded cage, and he had returned for the sole purpose of finding the key and setting himself free. The real estate agent in Bozeman, a slick man named Harrison, had promised a quick sale. A property with that kind of history, that kind of view, developers will be fighting over it, Mr. Thorn. Caleb spurred his horse Dust Devil along the ridge, the wind tearing at his canvas jacket. He wasn't thinking about developers. He was thinking about the finality of it all, the purging of a past that clung to him like the scent of pine and wood smoke. He was doing one last sweep of the property line, a ritualistic farewell to the fence posts his father had driven into the unforgiving soil. That's when he saw it. Against the bruised purple of the storm-heavy sky, the silhouette of the widow's watch was unmistakable. It was an ancient, gnarled cottonwood, its branches twisted into arthritic claws by a century of mountain gales. Local law claimed a homesteader's wife had hanged herself from its thickest limb after a brutal winter took her family. The tree had been a place of morbid fascination for Caleb. As a boy, a dark corner of the ranch his father had forbidden him from visiting. But something was wrong. A shape dark and unnatural marred the tree's familiar profile. It wasn't a broken branch. It was too symmetrical, too still. Caleb's gut tightened. He urged Dust Devil into a cautious trot, the horse's hooves crunching on the frozen ground. As he drew closer, the shape resolved itself with horrifying clarity. A man in a thin jacket, swaying gently in the wind, a thick rope cinched tight around his neck, the other end thrown over the legendary branch. His boots dangled a foot above a kicked-over crate. "Son of a bitch!" Caleb breathed the words stolen by the wind. He vaulted from the saddle before Dust Devil had even come to a full stop. His mind, usually a turbulent sea of resentment and financial calculations, became a laser point of pure primal focus. He fumbled at his hip, his numb fingers closing around the cold steel of his utility knife. The man's face was a grotesque mask, skin tinged a deepening blue eyes, bulging. A dusting of snow already clung to his shoulders. There was no time to think, only to act. Caleb scrambled onto the overturned crate, his own boots slipping on its icy surface. He reached up, sawing at the taut rope with frantic, desperate strokes. The fibers were thick, frozen stiff. For a heart-stopping second, he thought the blade was too dull, that he was too late. Then, with a sickening snap, the rope gave way. The man's body fell like a sack of stones, a dead weight that pulled Caleb off the crate with him. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The man landed heavily, a wheezing, strangled corb rattling in his chest. He was alive. Barely. Caleb rolled him onto his side, his hands working automatically, years of ranch life and its attendant emergencies taking over. He tore at the noose, loosening the suffocating knot from the man's raw, bruised neck. The man coughed a wet, ragged sound and then began to shudder violently, his body convulsing as it fought for air. He was painfully thin, his face gaunt with the hollowed-out look of starvation or sickness. His clothes were threadbare, completely inadequate for the coming storm. He was a stranger. No one from the valley, Caleb was sure of that. He knew every face within 50 miles. The first heavy flakes of snow began to fall, fat and wet, plastering themselves to Caleb's hat and the stranger's matted hair. The wind rose in pitch, no longer a warning, but a declaration of war. The sky was closing in the horizon, disappearing into a churning vortex of white. "Hell," Caleb muttered, looking from the gasping man to the roiling sky. The nearest neighbor was 10 miles away. The main road would be impassable within the hour. Harrison, the real estate agent, was a world away in his heated office. Here there was only the storm, the dying man, and the ghosts of Thorn Crest. He couldn't leave him here. Whatever damn fool reason this man had for choosing the Widow's Watch for his final act, Caleb couldn't let him finish the job. It wasn't heroism. It was a simple, stark equation of the wilderness. You don't let a man freeze to death, not even one who was trying to die. With a groan of exertion, Caleb hoisted the stranger into a fireman's carry. The man was lighter than he looked, a collection of sharp angles and fragile bones. He stumbled back to Dust Devil, who snorted nervously, his eyes wide at the scent of panic and impending blizzard. "Easy, boy, easy." Caleb soothed his voice, strained. He managed to drape the unconscious man over the saddle, securing him as best he could before mounting behind him. He turned the horse back toward the ranch house, a solitary light that was already beginning to shimmer and blur through the thickening snow. The wind screamed in his ears, and the weight of the stranger against his back was a chilling, intimate burden. He had come here to cast off the weight of his father's legacy, and instead he was dragging a half-dead man from the brink, pulling him straight into the heart of it. The blizzard hit with the force of a physical blow, erasing the world behind them. They were utterly alone, two men swallowed by the storm riding toward a lonely cabin that was about to become a pressure cooker of secrets and lies. Caleb didn't know it yet, but in saving this stranger's life, he had just pulled the pin on a grenade that had been buried in his family's past for over 30 years. The world outside the cabin ceased to exist. It dissolved into a shrieking white chaos that clawed at the log walls and rattled the window panes like a furious spirit. Inside, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire in the stone hearth and the stranger's shallow, ragged breaths. Caleb had managed to get him onto the worn leather couch that faced the flames. He'd stripped off the man's wet, flimsy clothes and wrapped him in a thick wool blanket, one his mother had woven decades ago. The man's body was a road map of hardship. His ribs stood out in sharp relief, and a lattice of old, faded scars crisscrossed his back and arms. On his neck, the rope had left a horrific, angry welt, a violent necklace of purple and red. For hours, Caleb was purely functional. He stoked the fire-brewed coffee he didn't taste and periodically checked the man's pulse. He was a problem to be managed, a complication in his well-laid plans to liquidate his life. Animosity simmered beneath Caleb's concern. Who the hell was this guy? What right did he have to come onto his land and try to end his life, making his problems? Caleb's problem. The act felt like a violation, another unwanted responsibility laid at his feet by the ranch he so desperately wanted to shed. The storm raged through the night and into the next day. The snow piled in monstrous drifts against the doors and windows, sealing them in. The power had flickered and died hours ago, plunging them into a world lit only by fire and a single oil lamp that cast long dancing shadows across the room. The isolation was absolute. The satellite phone was his only link to the outside world. But who would he call Sheriff Brody? "Hey, Alistair. Got a guy here who tried to hang himself. No, I don't know who he is. And yes, we're snowed in for the foreseeable future." The conversation felt absurd. Sometime in the late afternoon of the second day, the stranger began to stir. He moaned a low, pitiful sound. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, fluttered open, but they were unfocused, glazed with fever. "Water." He rasped, his lips cracked and dry. Caleb, who had been staring into the fire, was startled. He moved to the couch, holding a tin cup of melted snow to the man's mouth. The stranger drank greedily, water dribbling down his chin. He coughed, then sank back into the blankets, his body trembling. "Where?" he whispered, his gaze drifting around the rustic room, taking in the mounted elk antlers, the stone fireplace, the heavy timber beams of the ceiling. "Thorncrest Ranch," Caleb said, his voice flat. "You were on my property, at the old cottonwood." He left the rest unsaid. The rope, the crate, the desperation. The stranger's eyes showed no recognition, only a deep, feverish confusion. He shivered again, pulling the blanket tighter. He muttered something, a jumble of words too low for Caleb to catch. Caleb leaned closer, annoyed at having to play nursemaid. "What was that?" he asked more harshly than he intended. The man's eyes suddenly focused not on Caleb, but through him, as if seeing something far away, a memory dredged up from the depths of his delirium. His breathing hitched. He spoke again, and this time the words were clear, crystalline, in the fire-lit silence. They were words that had no place in this stranger's mouth, words that belonged to a buried chapter of the ranch's history. "Chief Two Crows." The name hit Caleb like a physical blow. The air rushed from his lungs. The cabin, which had felt confining moments before, suddenly felt vast and empty. It was a name he hadn't heard in years, not since he was a boy. It wasn't his father's legal name, Caleb Thorne Sr., but a title, a moniker given to him long ago by the elders of the Crow Creek Reservation that bordered their land to the east. It was a name spoken with a mixture of awe and suspicion, a name that held stories Caleb only knew in fragments, stories of land disputes, of a shared winter hunt that saved the tribe from starvation, of a hard-won, complicated respect between a white rancher and a people whose history was written on the same land. His father had never explained it fully. "Some things are between me, the mountain, and the people who were here first." He'd grumbled once, and that was the end of it. How could this man know that name? This wretch, this ghost he'd pulled from a noose. It wasn't common knowledge. It wasn't something you'd read in a history book or overhear in a Bozeman bar. It was an intimate piece of Thorncrest lore, a secret handshake between the past and the present. Caleb stared at the man, a cold dread creeping up his spine, far colder than the storm outside. The stranger's presence was no longer a random tragic inconvenience. It was targeted. It was a message. "What did you just say?" Caleb demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The stranger's eyes rolled back in his head. His body went limp, succumbing once more to the fever. He was unconscious again, leaving the name hanging in the air between them, a question that echoed with the fury of the blizzard. Caleb backed away from the couch, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked around the cabin at the familiar objects that suddenly felt alien. His father's armchair, his father's portrait over the mantelpiece, a stern, unsmiling man with eyes that missed nothing. The entire room, the entire ranch felt different now. It was as if this stranger with 2 whispered words had revealed a hidden door in the foundation of Caleb's life, and he was terrified of what lay on the other side. The blizzard wasn't the only thing that had him trapped. He was now imprisoned by a single impossible question. Who was this man? And how in God's name did he know his father's secret name? The fever broke on the 3rd day. The storm still howled a relentless siege, but inside the cabin, a fragile quiet had settled. The stranger awoke not with the delirium of before, but with a weary lucidity. His pale blue eyes, no longer clouded, were filled with a profound and unsettling sorrow. He introduced himself as Arlo. Just Arlo. He spoke in a low, raspy voice, answering Caleb's questions with a reticence that bordered on painful. He offered no explanation for his actions at the widow's watch, only a muttered, "Sometimes a man reaches the end of his road." Caleb wasn't buying the poetic fatalism. He had replayed the moment over and over in his mind, the whispered name. It was a key, and he intended to find the lock it belonged to. He poured Arlo a mug of broth and sat in the armchair across from him, the hearth fire separating them like a referee in a silent match. "Let's cut the crap, Arlo." Caleb began, his voice devoid of warmth. "Yesterday you said a name. Chief 2 Crows. I want to know how you know it." Arlo flinched, a subtle but unmistakable reaction. He stared down into his mug, his knuckles white where he gripped the handle. "Fever dreams," he mumbled. "Don't know what I was saying." "Try again?" Caleb pressed, leaning forward. "That name isn't a fever dream. It's specific. It belonged to my father. Now who are you, and what do you want here?" A long slants stretched between them, filled only by the howl of the wind. Arlo looked up, and for the first time Caleb saw something other than despair in his eyes. It was a flicker of defiance of a story straining to be told. "My mother's name was Amelia," Arlo said softly. "Amelia Vance. She grew up not far from here in Livingston. She was a waitress at a diner on the highway, a long time ago." Caleb's mind raced. He didn't recognize the name. Vance. It meant nothing to him. And she knew him. Arlo continued, his gaze drifting to the portrait of Caleb Sr. above the mantel. "She knew Caleb Thorne. She told me stories about this place, about the mountains, the creek, and the man who ran it all." The implication hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Caleb felt a surge of hot, protective anger. "You're telling me my father, a married man, was involved with a highway waitress? You come onto my land, try to kill yourself, and now you're going to spin some story to try and get something out of me. Is that the play? A long-lost secret love child? Here to claim a piece of the pie?" Arlo's face hardened. "I came here to see the place she talked about. The place that haunted her until the day she died. I came here with nothing. I don't want your money." His voice cracked on the last word. "There's no pie left to claim." Caleb didn't believe him. It was too perfect, too theatrical. A desperate man, weaving a tale of tragedy to prey on a grieving son. Except Caleb wasn't grieving. He was liberating himself. This man, this Arlo, was just another chain. Dismissing him with a disgusted wave, Caleb stood up and began to pace. He needed to discredit the story, to find proof that it was a lie. And he knew where to start. His father's study. The study was just as the old man had left it, smelling of leather tobacco and old paper. It was a shrine to his father's public life. Ranching ledgers, cattle pedigrees, maps of water rights. Everything was meticulously organized, a testament to a man who controlled his world with ruthless efficiency. Caleb had been through most of it, sorting out the financials for the sale. But there was one thing: he hadn't touched the bottom right drawer of the massive oak desk. It was locked. Caleb had rattled it once or twice, assumed it held personal effects he didn't care about, and left it. Now it seemed like the most important thing in the world. He jiggled the handle again, locked tight. He searched the other drawers for a key, but found nothing. Frustrated, he began to rifle through his father's bookshelves, pulling out volumes on animal husbandry and Montana history, shaking them in case a key was hidden within the pages. Nothing. His eyes fell on a shelf of old leather-bound photo albums. He hadn't looked at them in years. He pulled one down, the cover stiff and cold. He flipped through the pages. There was his father, younger, wirier, standing proudly next to a prize-winning bull. There was his mother, Lydia, her smile always a little sad, standing on the porch. There was Caleb as a boy, scowling atop a pony. The official family history, captured in silver gelatin. He was about to put the album back when a loose photograph slipped from between two pages and fluttered to the floor. He bent to pick it up. The photo was older, the edges yellowed. It showed his father, not the stern patriarch from the portrait, but a man in his late 20s, smiling a genuine, unguarded smile Caleb had rarely seen. He had his arm around a woman. It was not Caleb's mother. This woman was beautiful with dark, wavy hair and eyes that sparkled with life, even in the faded black and white image. She was looking up at his father with an expression of pure, unadulterated adoration. On the back, in faded blue ink, was a simple inscription: Caleb and Amelia Summer, 88. Amelia. Caleb's blood ran cold. He stared at the photograph, at the ghost of a woman named Amelia Vance, and the undeniable truth of her connection to his father. He looked from the smiling man in the picture to the stern face in the portrait over the fireplace in the other room. They were the same man, but they were worlds apart. He sank into his father's leather chair, the photograph trembling in his hand. Arlo wasn't just spinning a story. He was holding a piece of it. And this picture hidden away in a family album was another. The narrative Caleb had constructed for his life, the simple if unhappy story of a son and his emotionally distant father, was beginning to fracture. He was no longer certain of the foundation on which he stood. The locked drawer across from him suddenly felt like a Pandora's box, and Caleb was beginning to realize he had to open it, no matter what demons might fly out. On the fourth morning, the wind finally died. A profound, almost holy silence descended upon Thorn Crest, broken only by the soft thud of snow sliding from the eaves of the roof. The world outside was a pristine, blinding expanse of white under a sharp, crystalline blue sky. The immediate danger had passed, but the isolation remained. The drifts were enormous, easily 10 feet deep, in places burying fences and turning the landscape into a soft alien terrain. Caleb was on the porch, leaning against a post and nursing a cup of coffee when he heard it, a distant, high-pitched whine. It grew steadily louder, an insectile buzz against the vast silence. A snowmobile. Within 20 minutes, it crested the nearest ridge, a black machine carving a dark scar through the perfect white. At the helm was a large, familiar figure in a heavy winter parka. Sheriff Alistair Brodie. Brodie was a fixture in the valley, a man who had known Caleb since he was in diapers and had shared more than a few whiskies with his father. He was steady, pragmatic, and possessed a memory as long as a Montana winter. He killed the engine at the edge of the porch, the sudden silence deafening. "Caleb!" he called out, his voice gruff as he pulled off his helmet, revealing a weathered face and a thick graying moustache. "Figured I'd better check on you. Roads are a mess. Won't be able to get a plow up here for another day or two. You holding up?" "We're fine, Alistair. Got plenty of wood and food," Caleb replied, his eyes flicking back toward the cabin door. Brodie followed his gaze, his experienced eyes narrowing. There was no hiding it. Caleb sighed, the sound turning to steam in the frigid air. "Got a guest." He led the sheriff inside. Arlo was sitting at the kitchen table looking pale, but composed. He stood up respectfully as the lawman entered. Brodie's gaze swept over him, taking in the gaunt frame, the threadbare clothes Caleb had washed and dried, and the still angry bruise on his neck. "Sheriff Alistair Brodie," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp. He didn't offer a handshake. "And you are?" "Arlo Vance," the man replied, quietly. Caleb gave Brodie the heavily edited version of the story, that he'd found Arlo on his property, suffering from exposure as the storm rolled in, and had brought him in. He omitted the detail of the noose. It felt too raw, too complicated to explain, and he saw a flicker of gratitude in Arlo's eyes for the omission. Brodie listened, nodding slowly, his gaze never leaving Arlo. "Vance, you say?" "From around here?" "No, Sheriff. Just passing through," Arlo said. "Passing through in the middle of a blizzard with nothing but a thin jacket is a good way to end up a permanent resident of my morgue," Brodie stated flatly. He turned back to Caleb. "I can take him down to town. Got a spare helmet. We can get him checked out at the clinic, find him a room." It was an easy out, a way to get Arlo and his poisonous story off the ranch and out of Caleb's life, the part of Caleb that craved simplicity, that wanted the sale to go through without a hitch, screamed at him to agree. But the photograph in his pocket felt like a lead weight. The name Amelia was a splinter in his mind. "He's still weak, Alistair," Caleb heard himself say to his own surprise. "Fever just broke. Maybe another day. Let him get his strength back before you haul him across 10 miles of snowdrifts." Brodie looked at Caleb, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He clearly hadn't expected Caleb Thorne, who was famously impatient with strays and complications, to argue for keeping one around. "All right," the sheriff conceded. "Your call, but you radio me if there's any trouble. Any at all." He walked over to the fireplace, warming his hands. His eyes landed on the portrait of Caleb Sr. "Damn storm. Reminds me of the one in '92. Your father and I were stranded in a hunting cabin for 3 days, nearly killed each other." He chuckled a low rumble. "He wasn't an easy man to be trapped with," Caleb said, the words tasting bitter. "No, he wasn't." Brodie agreed, his expression turning serious. "He was a hard man. Hard on himself, harder on everyone else. But he had his reasons. A man like that, who builds something this big from nothing. He carries regrets as heavy as foundation stones." Caleb's ears perked up. "Regrets, my father." Brodie sighed, staring into the painted eyes of his old friend. He never said much. You know how he was. But once, after a few too many whiskies, he told me the biggest regret of his life wasn't a bad business deal or a lost herd. It was a choice he made when he was a young man, a choice about a person. Said he chose legacy over... something else. Something better. It haunted him, Caleb. Right to the end. The sheriff clapped Caleb on the shoulder. Just be careful, son. You're snowed in with a complete stranger. People get desperate. Don't let your father's house get the best of you. With a final lingering look at Arlo, Sheriff Brody headed back out into the blinding white, his snowmobile's engine soon fading back into the oppressive silence. His visit, meant to be a lifeline, had done the opposite. It had tightened the knot of doubt in Caleb's stomach. A choice about a person, legacy over something else. The words echoed in the quiet cabin, harmonizing perfectly with Arlo's fragmented story and the image of the smiling woman in the photograph. Caleb's skepticism was eroding, being washed away by a tide of unsettling coincidences. He was no longer sure he was dealing with a con man. He was beginning to fear he was dealing with the truth. The locked drawer in the study no longer seemed like a container of his father's secrets, but a tomb holding the ghost of the man he never knew, and Caleb knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he now had to break it open. The sheriff's visit was the final push Caleb needed. The ambiguity was more agonizing than any potential truth. After Brody's snowmobile faded into the distance, Caleb strode into the study with a new grim determination. Arlo remained in the main room, a silent spectre by the fire, leaving Caleb alone with the ghosts of the past. He stood before the old oak desk, his father's throne. The locked bottom drawer seemed to mock him, a final bastion of the old man's secrecy. He'd had enough of secrets. He went to the tool shed, the cold air biting his face, and returned with a heavy-duty pry bar. The wood of the desk groaned in protest as he forced the tip of the bar into the seam. For a moment, he hesitated. This felt like a desecration, a violation of the dead. But Brody's words, Arlo's face and the photograph of Amelia pushed him forward. He put his weight into it. With a loud crack that echoed like a gunshot in the silent house, the lock splintered and the drawer popped open. Caleb's breath caught in his throat. It was not filled with financial documents or old deeds. It was a time capsule, a hidden archive of a secret life. On top lay a small velvet-covered box. Caleb opened it. Inside, nestled on faded satin, was a delicate silver locket. He pried it open with his thumbnail. On one side was a tiny, professionally cut photo of his father, young and smiling the same smile from the loose photograph. On the other side was a matching photo of the woman Amelia. His hands trembled as he set the locket aside. Beneath it was a thick bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The envelopes were addressed in a looping feminine hand to Caleb Thorne, General Delivery, Livingston, MT. A way to receive mail without it coming to the ranch and his wife's attention. The sender was Amelia Vance. He untied the ribbon. The paper was brittle with age. He pulled out the first letter and began to read. My dearest Caleb, I know I shouldn't write, but I can't help myself. Seeing you last Tuesday was like the sun coming out after a month of rain. When you talk about the ranch, your eyes light up. I wish I could see it. I wish I could be a part of that world, not just a secret you keep in town. He read another and another. The letters painted a vivid, heartbreaking picture. A passionate, all-consuming affair between the powerful married rancher and the young, hopeful waitress. They wrote of stolen afternoons of meetings in dusty roadside motels, of dreams for a future they both knew was impossible. Amelia's words were full of love and hope, while his father's infrequent, brief replies, copies of which were tucked between hers, were fraught with a torment Caleb had never imagined the stoic man capable of feeling. Then he reached a letter near the bottom of the pile, the paper more worn than the others, as if it had been read and reread 100 times. Caleb, my love. I have news. It is wonderful and terrifying all at once. I am with child, our child. I know what this means. I know the position I am putting you in. But my love, this is not a complication, it is a blessing. It's a part of you, a part of us, that can be real and tangible in the world. We can make this work. We can find a way. Please tell me we can find a way. Caleb had to sit down. The air in the room was thick-heavy. He felt light-headed. He looked at the date on the letter. It was from the spring of 1989, a little over a year before Caleb himself was born. The timeline was a tangled, painful knot. His father was living a double life, a life with Amelia and the promise of their child, while still married to Lydia, Caleb's mother. The final letter from Amelia was different. The handwriting was shaky, stained with what looked like teardrops. Caleb, you have made your choice. You told me you would not leave your wife, that the Thorn name and the ranch could not bear the scandal. You offered me money to take care of the problem and disappear. I will not kill our child, but I will disappear. I will not be your dirty secret or your financial burden. I will raise this baby on my own, and he will know he was born of love, even if he can never know his father. I will love him enough for the both of us. Do not look for me. Do not try to find us. Goodbye. Amelia. Beneath that last devastating letter was a single official-looking document. It was a quitclaim deed, legally drawn up and notarized. It signed over a 40-acre parcel of land on the southern edge of Thorn Crest, a beautiful section with a year-round creek to one Amelia Vance. It was dated a week after the final letter. It was signed by Caleb Thorn Sr., but it had never been sent. It was tucked away in this drawer, a testament to a final unresolved conflict in his father's heart. He had chosen his legacy. He had chosen the Thorn name his wife Lydia, the son they would have a year later. He had chosen Caleb, and in doing so he had condemned another son, his firstborn, to a life without a father, without a name, without a home. Caleb leaned his head back, the leather of the chair, cool against his skin. The entire architecture of his life, his identity, his resentment, it was all built on a lie. He wasn't just the son of a hard, emotionally distant man. He was the son who had been chosen. His existence had been the reason for another's exclusion. The man sitting by the fire in the other room was not a stranger. He was not a con man. He was his brother. The weight of this revelation was crushing. It recontextualized everything. His father's stoicism wasn't just hardness. It was a shield for his guilt. His mother's perpetual sadness wasn't just her nature. It was the intuition of a woman living with a man whose heart was partially elsewhere. And Caleb's own resentment of the ranch felt suddenly petty and shallow in the face of the monumental injustice that had been done to Arlo. He slowly gathered the letters, the locket, and the unsent deed. His legs felt unsteady as he stood up. He had to go back into that room. He had to face the man he'd pulled from the noose, the man his father had abandoned, and reckon with a truth that was more vast and terrifying than any blizzard. Caleb walked out of the study, feeling like a stranger in his own skin. He held the packet of letters and the deed in his hand, the brittle paper a tangible testament to a lifetime of secrets. Arlo was still by the fire, staring into the flames, as if searching for answers in their dance. He looked up as Caleb approached, his pale blue eyes wary. Without a word, Caleb knelt by the hearth and laid the items on the stone floor between them: the silver locket, the bundle of letters, the folded land deed. Arlo stared at the objects, his breath catching. He reached out a trembling hand and picked up the locket, his thumb stroking the engraved silver. He opened it, and a choked, guttural sound escaped his lips as he saw the tiny portraits of the young man and woman. "My mother," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She had a photograph just like this one, worn and creased from 1,000 nights of looking at it. She told me he was a good man, a great man, who had to make a hard choice. "He made the wrong one," Caleb said, his own voice raw. He pushed the letters towards Arlo. "These are from her, and his replies. They're all here." For the next hour, a profound and heavy silence filled the cabin, punctuated only by the rustle of paper and the occasional soft, pained sigh from Arlo. He read his mother's life story in stolen moments and secret hopes. He read of her love, her pregnancy, her devastation, and her ultimate defiant solitude. Caleb watched him, seeing not a stranger, but the reflection of his father's eyes in a face etched with a hardship Caleb could barely comprehend. The animosity was gone, replaced by a deep, aching chasm of shared loss. When Arlo finally looked up, tears were streaming freely down his gaunt cheeks. "All my life," he began, his voice cracking as I felt like a ghost. "We moved around so much, never had enough money. My mother worked herself to the bone. She was always sad, but she never told me why. She just said my father was a man of the mountains, and that one day I would understand." He took a shaky breath. "She got sick a few months ago. Cancer. On her deathbed, she finally told me everything. His name, the ranch. She made me promise I would come here. Not for money, not for land, but to see his face, to see the place that I came from, to know that I was real." The story poured out of him a torrent of grief and lifelong questions. After his mother died, he'd used the last of his money to buy a bus ticket to Montana. He arrived with nothing, walked for miles, and saw the grandeur of Thorn Crest, the empire his father had built, the empire that had been chosen over him. Overwhelmed by a lifetime of abandonment and grief, he had walked to the old cottonwood tree, the widow's watch, feeling a kinship with its tragic story. He had decided to end his own. "I just wanted the pain to stop," Arlo whispered, looking at Caleb. "I'm sorry I brought it to your door." Caleb shook his head, the guilt twisting in his gut. "It was already here," he said. "I just never knew how to open the door." There was one last piece of the puzzle, the name that had started it all. Caleb looked at the satellite phone on the mantelpiece, its green light a steady beacon of connection to the outside world. He knew who he had to call. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he knew by heart, a number for the Crow Creek Reservation. An old woman's voice answered. "I need to speak with Joseph Blackwood," Caleb said. "Tell him it's Caleb Thorne, the son of the man you called Two Crows." There was a pause, then the phone was passed. A deep, calm voice came on the line. "Caleb, it has been many years. The mountain is white. I trust you are safe. I am Joseph, but I need to ask you something. Something my father never told me. The name you gave him. Two Crows. Why?" The elder was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with the weight of memory. "Your father was a complex man, a bridge and a wall all at once. In the great blizzard of '81, He shared his herd's winter feed with our people. His generosity saved us. For that we owed him respect. But we are a people who see things. We see the tracks a man leaves, even the ones he tries to hide. Joseph's voice dropped lower. Your father had 2 lives, Caleb. He had his family on the ranch under the eyes of the world, the first crow. But he carried a great secret, a great sadness. He had another family, a hidden one in the shadows. A woman in the town. A child. We knew. We saw his truck parked on the highway. We saw the sorrow in his eyes. That was his second crow. A black bird of regret he carried on his shoulder his entire life. The truth landed with the force of a thunderclap. It wasn't a name of pure honor. It was a name of knowing. A name that acknowledged the man's dual nature, the powerful rancher and the haunted man, the builder and the abandoner. We called him 2 Crows. Joseph finished softly, because he was a man with 2 nests, but he only ever sat in one. We respected the one. We mourned for the other. Caleb closed his eyes, the satellite phone, feeling heavy in his hand. He thanked the elder and hung up. He turned to Arlo, his brother, and saw the same understanding dawning in his eyes. The storm outside had passed. The pristine, unbroken snow represented a blank page. But here inside the cabin, the storm of the past had finally broken, washing away the lies, and leaving behind the raw, jagged, and undeniable truth of their shared blood. They were the sons of Chief 2 Crows, the legacy of both his honor and his shame. The dawn of the 5th day broke over a transformed world. The sky was a brilliant, aching blue, and the snow-covered landscape of Thorn Crest glittered as if dusted with diamonds. The silence was no longer oppressive, but serene. Inside the cabin, the air had shifted as well. The tension had dissolved, leaving a quiet, fragile space for 2 brothers to take their first tentative steps out of the wreckage of their father's life. They moved around the cabin, performing the simple morning rituals, stoking the fire, making coffee not as a caretaker and a burden, but as 2 men sharing a space that now belonged to both of them in ways neither had ever imagined. Caleb watched Arlo as he stood by the window looking out at the vast expanse of white. He was still gaunt, still bore the mark of the rope on his neck. But something had changed in his posture. The despair was gone, replaced by a quiet dignity. He was no longer a ghost haunting the edges of a story. He was standing at its center. My mother always said I had his eyes, Arlo said without turning around. I never knew what she meant until I saw that portrait. Caleb walked to stand beside him. He had his jaw, though. Caleb replied, a faint wry smile touching his lips for the first time in days. Stubborn. A flicker of a smile touched Arlo's face as well. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was a start. Caleb's plan to sell the ranch, to flee his past, now felt like a childish dream. Selling Thorn Crest would no longer be a liberation. It would be the ultimate betrayal. It would be erasing not just his own history, but Arlo's as well, the only inheritance his brother had ever had a chance of claiming. It would be repeating his father's mistake, choosing convenience over kinship. The real estate agent is named Harrison. Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. I'm going to call him today. I'm going to tell him the deal is off. Arlo finally turned to look at him, his pale blue eyes wide with surprise. You don't have to do that. This place is yours. You grew up here. I'm just a piece of his past you found by accident. No, Caleb said, shaking his head. He picked up the folded quitclaim deed from the mantelpiece and held it out to Arlo. You're not an accident. You're his son. His first son. He drew this up for your mother. 40 acres by the creek. He signed it. He just never had the courage to send it. Arlo took the document, his fingers tracing the elegant signature of the father he'd never known Caleb Thorne Sr. This land is your birthright, Arlo, Caleb continued. And this ranch, it's too much for one person. It was too much for him. Maybe that was the problem all along. He looked out at the mountains, the granite peaks that had witnessed everything. Maybe it takes two. The offer hung in the air between them. It wasn't just an offer of land. It was an offer of a name, a family, a future. It was a chance to mend the nest their father had broken. Arlo looked from the deed in his hand to Caleb's face, to the vast, beautiful and intimidating land stretched out before them. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of a man who had walked to the end of his road only to find a new one beginning. He didn't need to say yes. The answer was in his eyes. The snow would melt. The roads would clear. The complexities of their new reality would bring countless challenges. There would be legal battles, whispers in the valley, and scars that would never fully fade. But as the sun climbed higher, casting the long shadows of two men standing side by side in the doorway of their father's house, it was clear that the legacy of Thorn Crest was no longer about a single, hard man. It was now the story of the two crows returned to the same nest, ready to learn how to fly together. The story of Caleb and Arlo Thorne is a powerful reminder that the foundations of our lives are often built on secrets we cannot see. It shows us that legacy isn't just the land we inherit or the name we carry, but the choices we make when faced with a difficult truth. Caleb went back to that ranch to erase his past, but instead he found his future in the face of a brother he never knew he had. Together they chose not to run from the sins of their father, but to build something new from the broken pieces. Theirs is a story of redemption, not just for them, but for the ghost of the man known as Chief Two Crows. If this story of buried secrets, family drama, and the hard-won battle for redemption resonated with you, please take a moment to support our channel. Hit that like button to let us know you want more content like this. Share this video with someone who appreciates a story that digs deep into the human heart. And most importantly, click subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next journey into the dramatic tapestry of real life. Thank you for listening.